morning. I want to thank you all for joining us. My name is Anna Wilson, and I would like to welcome you to the Optimizing Process Now in StackVision webinar. It is hosted by ESC Spectrum's System Support Engineer 3, Michael Johnson.
All righty, thank you very much, Anna. As Anna mentioned, this is the Optimizing Process Now in StackVision webinar, and I am Michael Johnson. As Anna mentioned, I'm a System Support Engineer 3 at ESC Spectrum, and that is my my ESC email address. So if you want to jot that down real quick, if you have any questions or anything, maybe after the webinar, if anything comes up at all, you can feel free to contact me directly at that email address. I can answer whatever it is you might have questions on. So yeah, just a brief introduction. I have been an employee with ESC Spectrum for 6+ years now. I believe my 7-year anniversary will be in October. So I've been a part of the support team for most of this time. I'm a current part of the support team, but I have worked with the reporting department, and I've worked some with the engineering team. I've even worked with some in the accounting team, and through all those facets, I went through the list of the attendees, and I believe I've probably corresponded with everybody that was on the list at one time or another, which I thought was cool. You know, and maybe working with any one of those departments. So what we're going to be discussing in this webinar, we're going to be talking about what ProcessNow does, how it runs. We're going to look at some tips and troubleshooting techniques for when you have issues. Maybe ProcessNow is failing or it's airing out. We're going to look at some common issues, some things I'm pulling from my experience here working in the support department. So with my daily interactions with customers, there are some things that I continue to see, and so I feel like they're the important issues that we should discuss, because it seems like it's things that people continue to struggle with. And then at the end, we're going to talk about some different ways to maybe enhance ProcessNow and ProcessNow sequences that you may already have configured. So if you're new to StackVision, I know we have some new customers on. You know, you're going to hear the term ProcessNow a lot, and if you're unfamiliar with this, I had a new customer calling the other day that was not sure what exactly ProcessNow was, and so we needed to sit down and kind of start from square one. So ProcessNow it's a specifically formatted list of tasks that are unique to the operation and reporting requirements for your particular site. Okay, so it exists what we say central only, which is on the StackVision server, so it's on the server side. Foundation of ProcessNow, it's a user-defined sequence, so it's not set up by default. And because it's such a specifically formatted list of these tasks, usually this is going to be set up by the ESC Spectrum engineer upon initial installation. So in this slide, it says 40 unique tasks. I think there's probably way more than that now with new features that are being added into StackVision. But I just like to give the disclaimer, you know, each site is like a snowflake. No two sites are, you know, permits are the same or they don't report the same. And so I don't think there's any two ProcessNow sequences that are alike. And just to reiterate, so here's a list of a bunch of different tasks. And, you know, they range from anywhere to doing part 75 validation to part 60 validation to math calculations and Knox correlation, you know, all these different things. So the list of tasks that you may have configured is going to be specific to your site. So how exactly does ProcessNow run? Well, you can run ProcessNow sequences manually. You can, from StackVision, if you log in and you go to Tools on the menu bar, you can go to Process Now and you will see the list of sequences configured in StackVision for you. And you can pick and select starting dates, end dates, and times for when you want to run those particular sequences. Most of the time we have these configured as scheduled tasks. So in StackVision, you have the option, you can go to the task scheduler wizard, which is under the configuration menu in StackVision, and you can set these to run at specific times. So, typically you're going to have a sequence that runs every hour. It runs at the top of an hour and it will make calculations and run different tasks for the previous hour so that things stay up to date as soon as they can. And then you'll have typically a daily sequence that will run every night after midnight, and it will run to the beginning of the quarter up until the last completed day inside that quarter. But like I said, Process Now is unique to sites and how they operate, and so there are customers out there, especially in the refining world, that actually have sequences that run every minute. So it just depends on how you operate and how you need to report. One thing I wanted to note when you run Process Now and how it can run, there is an option now to run the sequences asynchronously. Previously, before we had this option, when you configured Process Now, you would have a sequence that would run daily, probably for every unit that you have. And so if you had 5 different units and you had 5 different Process Now sequences, you'd usually have those set to run after midnight, and they would have to queue up and complete one after the other. Well, now there is an option in the task scheduler wizard to run these asynchronously so that they can run at the same time, because when you have several different sequences running back to back to back, it can take upwards of, we start talking about, instead of minutes, we start talking about hours for these things to complete. And it's possible it could be, other things could be queuing up, not being able to run. So having the option to run asynchronously is a good thing, and it really can cut down on the amount of time it takes for sequences to run. All right, so Process Now, since it is such a powerful tool and important tool, it is important to monitor to make sure that you're passing, that it's actually running, or we're going to look at there's times when it can get caught in a loop where it can't pass or fail and it's stuck. So we're going to look at that, and in those instances, how we could fix that. So if Process Now is, like I was saying, if there was an instance where it was stuck or it was airing out or failing to run altogether, it can cause different types of headaches for you. If a Process Now sequence has 20 different tasks that it needs to run, but it fails on task 3, the problem is that when it fails on that task, it stops running Process Now and it doesn't get to the subsequent tasks, right? And so when it does that, you could miss certain calculations, missing data. It's not hitting certain math tasks to run. Your data could not be accurate because of this as well. And also limited alarm functionality. There's a lot of alarm functionality and alerts and warnings, emails that get sent out. People really depend on this as a way to monitor. And so it's possible that if Process Now is failing to run or was airing out, that you wouldn't even be hitting certain checks for exceedances, and you could not know that you had an exceedance. In fact, I had a support case, I think a week ago, where Process Now had been failing for about 3 weeks. And the reason why I got caught is because the customer didn't really know too much about how Process Now ran, but they knew how to look at their data, and they were saying, hey, our data is just not accurate. I don't know what's going on. And upon further investigation, it was because Process Now had been failing for so long. And we discussed the alarm functionality and how that could cause major headaches if you're not reporting exceedances. So So different things to check. When you log into StackVision, the main thing that will stare you in the face is down at the bottom right. There's this gear icon. You'll notice if you log in and you see a red X, that means that the last ProcessNow sequence that tried to run failed. That icon, if you're currently running a ProcessNow task, you'll see a green arrow to tell you that it's currently processing. But as soon as you see that red X go up on the bottom there, then you know you've got a problem. Along with that, there's alarm pop-ups. You get an application alarm when ProcessNow fails, and so when you get these, that's important to go and start investigating what's going on. And other tools associated with alarms, alarm history report, and then the active alarm screen. These are all things that that can be included in daily checks, especially the alarm history report. That's something that you could even schedule to have go out to you every day. So just something to use to check and make sure that ProcessNow is running correctly. A really important report to use and look at is the ProcessNow history report. When looking at this report, you can tell, it lists out which sequences have run, and it'll tell you what the status is. So this would be an example of a list of sequences that have run. If we were going back to check, everything's okay, everything's looking good. In the event that you have failures, you're going to get a status of error. And this report, which is pretty cool, when you do error out, you can take a specific sequence and you can expand on this sequence by clicking on that plus sign. And what that's going to do, that's going to actually show you which tasks were able to run, but most importantly, it's going to show you which task you're failing on. So that can be an important troubleshooting technique when you're looking at your errors. So give a specific task that is failing. The task status details exit value and configured error thresholds. You're going to see that when you look at these tasks, which ones are failing. It's going to say something like here, it says exit value 90, configured error threshold 80. We're going to look at that in the next slide, and what that might mean. So that can be useful information. Also, the status of error is actually, you can click on that. It's a link. It'll run the report to drill down to that task, and it may provide additional details to help you troubleshoot anytime ProcessNow is failing to run. So the exit value versus configured threshold we were just talking about. I just want to, because you're going to see that when you run the report if you have failures, and I just want you to know that this is something that is configured in Stack Studio. You have error threshold set. You can go into Stack Studio and you can look at this, and you can go look and see what your thresholds are and what those thresholds mean. But if you're ever confused by looking at what that actually means, you can go and look that up here in Stack Studio. Looking at the error link, if you will, that runs the report. So when you click on that, this is an example of what you might see, and this is probably one of the best examples of getting a return with some very useful information. Here, we're actually given parameter names, dates, and times, and it's actually telling us that we've got unprocessed or incomplete data. And so it's actually telling us exactly what the problem is, which is when we have information like this, using that report, it's very easy to clear up any kind of failures. Other things, when you run that report, we're specifically talking about ProcessNow failures and when it errors out, but you might run that report for the day to see how things have been, and it's possible that ProcessNow, the report could be blank. Maybe it hadn't run at all. You're missing sequences, it's not running. So you can go back and run that report, go back and see what the last sequence was that had run, and kind of go from there and see what might have happened around that day. We've seen with over the last year or so, we're seeing a lot of people migrate to a new server. And one of the steps in a server migration process, so this is when you actually take your database and move it over to a brand new server, is that you need to export those scheduled tasks for ProcessNow. And that can be an easy step to miss in the server migration process. So when you do that, we've seen customers where they run this report back and say, hey, these things haven't ran since we migrated servers. Yeah, well, that's because they're not set. So you need to export those tasks over or recreate them. Another thing that you can see is, let's say we ran ProcessNow back several days or hours or whatever, and you notice that you have a status of started. And there's no way, I mean, that ProcessNow sequence should have completed. It usually takes 30 minutes. So why does it still say started? And if you expand out and look at your list of tasks, you can see maybe one of them still says started. And what most likely has happened is that this task is caught in a loop, and it's what we would say it's hung up. And this is a pretty common thing that we'll see as people call in and say, hey, what's going on? Like, it's failing to run, it won't run. That's because a previous sequence was hung up. And so the way you fix that is on the StackVision server, you need to go and open up the task manager and go and find that specific task. And you can go and choose to end or that process, and you can just choose to end that process. And what will happen is ProcessNow will skip over that task, and it'll continue to run and complete, and then you can go back and try to troubleshoot why maybe that got hung up or why it was failing to complete properly. I think we got some questions, so let me go over and see if I can. Okay, so one of the questions is, I'm new to StackVision, seeing quite often invalid data. What does this invalid data mean? Okay, so that could be, that could be quite a few different things. Invalid data being failed calibration sequences. There could be missing data. If data doesn't pull into StackVision, you can have invalid data there as well. That would really need to be kind of a case-by-case basis. And if being new to StackVision and seeing that, I would definitely suggest at the end, I'm going to show you some slides on how you can get in touch with support. You can get in touch with me, and we can go over that specifically. So moving on to what this kind of ties right in, what troubleshooting tools are available, especially for a question like that. I mean, there's the StackVision help in StackVision, very useful, tons of information. They keep that up to date with new features, and when you upgrade StackVision, and it's got a great search engine, so you can type in anything, and it whatever you might have a question on it, or an area of StackVision, has lots of great information there. The ESC website and community, that contains a knowledge base that you can go and search, that provides articles that can give you steps for troubleshooting or fixing any sort of issues you might have. The website and community, that you need a login for that. If you do not have one, or you're not sure if you have one, please contact me at the end, or you can contact support, and we can look at your account or get you set up with one. And so support, always here to help. That's the main support line, 512-250-7901. That's the main support email. There's the customer community, which we just talked about, and then we've got Live Agent, which is pretty cool. That doesn't get used a whole lot. You have to log into the customer community to use it. But if it's just a quick quick question you might have, there's always somebody available there to help answer that during the normal business hours. So give that a shot. That might be something, a tool that you can start using more and more. So common errors and fixes. We're going to look at some of these errors and see how you could actually fix these things and how you could use some of these tools to fix these errors. So one of the most common ProcessNow errors that we see in support is with the Stack Daily Record Utility task, the UDR task. So when it fails on this task and you go and click the error, you'll see this is the example that we saw earlier where it gave us all this great useful information. So we're getting parameter names, dates, and times. So we can actually take this and pull this up in StackVision to look at the data and see what maybe we need to fix. So this Stack Daily Record task, the UDR task, it calculates these records. It's the operating time and data, the QA enabled parameters that are very important for operation to your system. That's like your uptime parameter, load, fuel factor parameters. These should never be blank. They can never be marked missing, invalid, or OOC, out of control. And so this error message is telling you that one of these parameters is in one of these states, and so ProcessNow cannot pass. You have to go and fix that data. There are various causes for why that data might be that way, but importantly, it needs to be fixed. So here, I'm showing the example of pulling that up actually in Data Lab, and you can see this specific hours blank, and that would need to be fixed. If you were to troubleshoot this using the knowledge base, you'd get a brief explanation here, but at the bottom half of that answer, you can see launch a Data Lab, go look at these specific parameters, make whatever edits you need to, click Save Without ProcessNow, which we're going to talk about, and then actually go, you can manually rerun your sequence and make sure that it's now passing, or perhaps just wait for the next scheduled ProcessNow sequence to run. But going back to that Save Without ProcessNow icon, that's another really common question that we see is it to save with ProcessNow or not to save with ProcessNow? What's the right answer there? And so I would just say be very wary of using Save with ProcessNow, because what that does is when you make an edit with your data and you choose to save with ProcessNow, it automatically kicks off a ProcessNow sequence. And that might not necessarily be the one that you want to run. And you could recalculate some data that you don't necessarily want to recalculate. So these sequences are defined in Stack Studio. They're source associations. You define what sequence you want to run. And so my advice is just, I personally, I never use the save with ProcessNow. I'm always save without the blue disk icon, and I'll just go back and manually run ProcessNow if I need to. So moving on to another error that's very common in what we see in support is with the parameter daily record task, the PDR task. This is another really important task. It calculates Part 75 auxiliary data, like PMA, percent monitor availability, or bias factors, et cetera. Helps validate different things with substitution. So this is a very important task. And when we see errors with this task, we usually see this at the beginning of a new quarter. And the reason for that is a lot of times this error is going to be associated with a new quarter has started, but ProcessNow is not successfully completed for the prior quarter. And so sometimes that can lead to ProcessNow failing in the current quarter on PDR. So using the history report, you could go back, find, hey, did we pass? So, we've got the fourth quarter is going to start here very soon. When it does start, if you were to fail ProcessNow specifically on the PDR task, you'd want to go back into the third quarter, back into September or October 1st. That's the actual last day that the third quarter ProcessNow sequence would run, and make sure that one's passing before trying to keep going and troubleshooting rerunning for fourth quarter. So some things just to keep in mind when running ProcessNow. You never want to run over a quarter boundary for, especially when we're talking about Part 75 reporting. This can cause failures. This can cause data to be inaccurate. This can cause you to perhaps have to re-report data that's already been reported. So you always want to make sure you're not running over quarter boundaries, and you want to make sure ProcessNow is completed for prior quarters when troubleshooting, sequences that are failing early in a quarter. And then another reason you might see PDR failing is because if you're having to go run ProcessNow back over previous data, previous quarters, and you actually lock that data, it's possible. I mean, ProcessNow will fail, and you actually have to go and unlock that data before you can proceed. So just some things to think about when manually running ProcessNow, and when you see that specific error on the parameter daily record. So just a disclaimer: don't run over the quarter boundary. Something else that we see a lot of is with failures with the CalCheck task. CalCheck is a tool that's replacing checkout at Control 60. That's an older tool that is used for Part 60 reporting and validation as it pertains with calibration specifically, and how to validate data based on calibrations passing or failing or hitting maintenance limits. So CalCheck is, there's a lot of enhancements with this tool, but right now with a lot of how people have it configured, we actually will fail CalCheck whenever we have a status of an errored calibration. Okay, so this cal record actually has an error status. It's not passing, it's not failing, it's not hitting maintenance limit, it's error. And what's happened is, could be various reasons for why this is erroring out. Could be an aborted cal, something, whatever it is. But what's happened is we're getting a SIM value that we can't read. It's really not a number, and it pops up as a -999. So when you have a cal record like this and CalCheck runs back, tries to validate data, it doesn't know what to do with this. And like I said, there's going to be some enhancements with this tool, and in the future, this might not be an issue, but we do see this a lot where it will fail, and you actually need to go to that cal record in Cal Lab and choose how it needs to be reported. Meaning, do we actually need to use this calibration sequence? Do we just need to get rid? Don't let CalCheck run over it all. There's a field you can bring in Cal Lab. It's a use column and has a check. If it's being used, you can remove that check. If you don't need to use it, and then CalCheck would be able to pass. If it is something that needs to be marked as a failing calibration, what you can do to get around this is go and change that SIM value in Cal Lab to something that shows that it fails. And then ProcessNow will be able to run over and process that data. Like I said, this is something that's a work in motion, and so hopefully we'll see a lot less of these headaches in the future. And I think specifically, there's a lot of enhancement with this coming in the newer versions of StackVision. So when we have these other webinars based on, especially 6.12, it'll be important to listen to that and hear the updates about with CalCheck. So a little bit about it. So enhancing some maybe existing sequences that you might have. So running asynchronously, like we talked about a little bit earlier, meaning if you've got sequences right now, multiple sequences that might run after midnight, and they queue up and they run one after another, and it's taken forever. Well, yeah, go in and let's run those asynchronously. We'll run them at the same time. That'll really cut down on the amount of time ProcessNow has to run. Upgrade StackVision. So like I was just saying, there's a webinar on 6.12 coming out, and they'll go over any enhancements that might be coming out for ProcessNow and specific tasks in ProcessNow. And so upgrading StackVision can be a really good way to enhance any sort of sequences. Update outdated tasks. We have some customers that, they got configured, their systems got configured a long time ago. Nothing's really changed with how they need to report. So, they just kind of chug along, everything's great, but they might be using some of these outdated tasks, and we might be able to go in and enhance some of this stuff with new tools, CalCheck or XScript or whatever it is. And so, get with somebody, call support or get with your engineer, and we could go in and look at your sequences together and try to determine how you might be able to clean some of these up. Remove redundant tasks is my last bullet there. Some of these older sites too, they might have a bunch of different tasks doing the same thing in the same sequence. Seen that before. We can actually, hey, let's combine these two. Or maybe you have a bunch of condition managers that are running, and they all have one specific task that can all be done, and if we run XScript instead. So something to keep in mind. Again, I wanted to throw up the support page. Anybody that needs to, if you're having some sort of error or anything, call support, email support, go to, you can submit tickets through the customer community if you want to. If you send an email to that support, it goes into our queue, and then we can create a ticket off of that. And like I said, I want to throw the plug in for Live Agent, because we don't get a whole lot of traffic with that. I think it is a useful tool. So if you've never used that before, log into the community. If you have a quick question or anything, like I said, an agent's available during the normal business hours. It's 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Central Time. So give that a shot. It might be something useful. Maybe you won't like it, but maybe it'll really help you out down the road. So now I'm going to go back and look at some of the questions I think I might have missed. And if you have any questions now, if you want to submit those in the chat, please do so. All right, so someone had the question that they'd be interested in a webinar on XScript condition manager files. Is that a possibility for the future? I'm not exactly sure what is on the schedule, but I know we have done those presentations like that in the past. And so if you go onto the ESC website, there are past presentations made available. And like this presentation will be made available as well. And so you can go back and see what might already be out there, definitely. Are you saying, okay, one of the questions is based on XScript, and does it run faster than Condition Manager? Well, XScript has a lot more capability. And so what I've personally seen is when we, before XScript existed, it's possible that you might be trying to complete you have one goal, but you might be running several different condition managers in your ProcessNow sequence to accomplish that one goal. And with some of the more availability, the more, XScript's just more powerful of a tool to use, we can accomplish some of this stuff with running one task instead of running multiple, which can bog down sequences. And
there's another one on here, Michael. This is Anna. I don't know if you saw this question. It says, does PDR need to be rerun after Knox core?
After Knox core. So I'm assuming that it is a question that maybe PDR is running, and then you have a Knox core sequence running, and does PDR need to run again? I am not exactly sure. I'm not exactly sure on that. I am not an expert on the Knox correlation, but I will definitely find out. So I will take a note of who asked that question, and I will be sure to follow up.
Sure, I've got two other questions here. I'll read them aloud as best I can. The first one is there a reason why asynchronous PN execution can only be used from the scheduler? I'd like to be able to run it manually, asynchronously.
Okay, perfect. That is something definitely, if there is not a enhancement request out there to do this, then I think that would be a great candidate to write up. I'll personally do that. I'll search and see if there's something out there. And if not, I will get that put in. That's a great idea.
I've got one other one on here. This was kind of submitted at the beginning, so it probably pertains to more of your first couple slides. It says the red X does not persist. It gets overwritten by the next good PN and makes it hard to see the problem. I think it should stick until fixed or manually cleared. That might be another enhancement request.
Yeah, yeah, that, when you run ProcessNow, if you have a failure, but then you run another sequence, maybe, you want to make sure that Redx goes away to know that the sequence that you're currently running. I think maybe that's the idea behind it, is it's always the sequence that you're either currently running or the one that had just run to clear, so that when you manually run sequences specifically whether or not they're passing or failing. But that is another good, I can see why you'd want that to stick, because it's a very easy visual when you log into StackVision. My eye always, that's kind of the first place it goes to. So I could see that being helpful. So that's something that I can also look at. And if that's not written up, I would be happy to write that up as an enhancement request as well. Anna, was there anything else that I might have missed?
One just came in. It says, this is Eric Bowers stating that PDR does not need to be run after Knox core.
Okay, thank you, Eric Bowers. And I'll straighten out kind of my question, because it does show who asked, and so I'll circle back with anybody. I'd be happy to on any of these specific questions.
I don't see any other questions, Michael.
Okay. All righty. Well, hey, everybody that's still on, thank you very much for attending. Feel free to, if you want to contact support, if you have any questions specifically about the presentation, maybe something that'll come up later, you can use any of the support outlets to get a hold of me. And I'd be happy to talk with anybody or go through any issues that you might be having. So thank you very much for attending.